my pleasure to welcome you to our 20th meeting of the Rotary year, and this might be an interesting stat for someone who knows their maths. Our 5,011th meeting of Rotary Melbourne. Okay, we're now 130 years, so it's great. Very pleased that you can make it. We are all in this together. What we have in this room tonight are all of the elements of the supply chain for green transition in our society. We have funding groups, Scott. We have advisors in sustainability audits, Chris and Chris. I won't go into surnames. We have access to the products, the batteries, another Chris, Felix Batteries, solar, water, wind. We have software, Tomorrow X. We have the intellectual smarts, Rob Gell, through the Royal Society of Victoria. We have Rotarians, but we also have consumers, and that's all of us. We have to step up in due course and figure out how we're going to transition our lives and our organisations over time to make a better humanity and a better environment. Now, one of the questions you may ask is, well, what's Rotary Melbourne got to do with any of this? Well, Rotary Melbourne, first club in Australia and the Pacific, the biggest club, the club that takes big ideas nationally, internationally, in collaboration with other clubs. That's who Rotary Melbourne is. And the environment and sustainability is one of the 7 focus areas of Rotary International. And we want a big part of it. We want a big play, we have a great group within Rotary Melbourne, and in fact, we have to do this together. So my ask tonight is for you all to enjoy and interact with our panelists and our fellow guests, but also to join us, if you're interested in Rotary Melbourne, so that we can embed the green transitioning process and hasten the process, because we've got all the supply chain elements here. So with that now, I'll pass on to the chairman of the evening, George Umadakis. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Chris. So welcome everyone to EV Mythbusters. The way that we will organise the panel discussion is basically in 3 parts, because it's quite clear when you do a quick Google search, even talking amongst the people here, there are 3 things that come up mostly. Range anxiety, battery lifespan, grid capacity. Now I'll introduce the panellists in a sec, and we'll ask them some questions. At the end, I will call for questions from the floor, and you're welcome to bombard them. So first, a little bit about the panellists. I did a little bit of research, and between the 3, if you combine all 3, there's over 100 years of experience between them. Well over a decade each, in particular with the EVs, which is quite amazing. And the other thing I asked them was, I said, okay, can you tell me something a bit quirky about what you do apart from, your job? And what came out on all 3 was that they're rev heads. The 3 of them. So there's another consistent piece. So I'll call them up one by one as I introduce them. I'll start with Heather Bone. Heather, if you could take your seat.
All right.
So Heather has more than 25 years experience in transport and logistics, renewable energy, alternative fuels and environmental sustainability in Australia and internationally. Having worked both private and publicly listed entities, Heather is currently the Director of ESG for Team Global Express, Australia's largest intermodal business, and the Chair of the Australian Logistics Sustainability Committee. Next, now these 2 guys I actually worked with, so if you want any dirt on them, happy to divulge.
Please share it, George. Please share it.
Steve Amor. Steve is a self-confessed transport and e-mobility tragic. A career spanning over 3 decades working in product management and senior business development roles at NHP, Siemens, Rockwell and ABB has provided well-rounded experience and built in a reputation for providing reliable, sustainable solutions that improve productivity through technically advanced products. As Energy Australia's Green Transport Senior Solution Design Specialist, Steve is engaged in identifying, evaluating and scoping green transport fleet and public EV charging opportunities. Last but by no means obviously least, Alex Kozlovich. Alex is an electrical engineer and a rev head, as I said, so EV are a natural fusion of his two great passions. He once actually did tell me that he won the Pimp My Ride competition for a modified HSV, as well as holding patents for power distribution products and actively participating in Australian electrical standards committees. He is the head of digital transformation and automation at Visy, where he's currently implementing 63 autonomous guided vehicles across their Melbourne-based operations. So as you can see, these guys are pretty qualified. So we'll get to it. The other thing that I will do at the end is I will call upon Chris Todd from TBS, and I'll also call back Richard to be part of the panel discussion in case you have any questions for those gentlemen as well. So let's get going. So Alex, I'll start with you.
Yes.
Because as you know, I'm picking on you first. Yeah, actually, yeah. We've got to make sure that you,
Put a time on.
So, how are you guys see, well, how are you in particular seeing the world changing in relation to sustainability, EVs, renewables and the like? You got 30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay. When it comes to EVs, I mean, you look at the statistics for the Australian market, there's about 20 million vehicles out there. We buy about 1 million vehicles a year. And the percentages of EVs every year is increasing. You know, it's probably going to be close on 80 to 90,000 this year. So I can see that there's an appetite. I think the issue that we had in Australia was lack of supply. The people do want to buy EVs, there's good reasons for it. And once all the manufacturers start supplying the vehicles that they can, you'll see a really huge uptake. And most of them are going to be fully electric by 2030 anyway. I think I'm out of time.
Lack of supply
Happy
of
to
cars.
lack of supply of electric vehicles, because we don't have fuel efficiency standards here. So what happens overseas, take the UK in particular, and Europe, if you've got a vehicle that consumes more than 5 litres per 100, you get penalised for it, you get taxed for it. So if you sell a vehicle at 10 litres per 100, like a typical twin cab ute, you've got to offset by selling an electric vehicle. We don't have to do that here. So they will send their electric vehicles to the markets where they're going to get penalised. Here it doesn't happen. But the EV Council are pushing heavily with the government to try and get that fuel efficiency standard in. That'll help. We'll get our supply and we'll suppress the appetite for the demand of electric vehicles right now.
Heather, you're a little bit different because you decided that you wanted to electrify trucks. What on earth got in your head to do that?
I was drunk. We've got this amazing lady as our CEO. You might have heard of her, Christine Holgate. And when Team Global Express was divested from Toll Group, I went up to Christine and said, "How would you feel about getting some electric trucks?" And she said, "Absolutely, no problem. Off you go." And that was it. I was sober at the time, but it was, it was at the time.
So you got drunk after you said yes?
I got really drunk afterwards, yeah. And I got drunk a lot over the next year while we figured out the Arena Grant, because it's really, really hard. And the fuel efficiency comment is exactly the same for trucks and for heavy equipment, for big yellow equipment, as it is for cars. But the impact is so much worse. So we decided to have a go at seeing if we could get some grant funding to help us. We're now installing 60 electric trucks into one of our facilities. To give you a bit of perspective though, we've got about 6,000 trucks.
Wow.
And this is the biggest trial ever stupidly attempted in the world. So, and it really is. When we...
Great case study.
Our Director of Communications is in the audience, so I'll be really careful what I say. But we... it's the biggest order that Volvo Group has ever received for these trucks, 36 trucks. It's the biggest order that Daimler has ever received for these trucks, which are 24 trucks. And so we're learning as we go. And over the last couple of years, when we've gone through the process of the design and the outcome, you know, every day is different, and every day there is something stupid goes wrong. Literally every day.
So what were some of the things that you didn't expect?
You know what? The trucks are actually easy. I would actually say the vehicles are easy, and I think Alex and Steve would agree. It's everything else that goes around it that is really challenging. So your total cost of ownership of the trucks is more than double the diesel equivalent. So and it's not coming down anytime soon compared to the cars. We had things like fire safety regulations. There are no fire safety regulations for electric trucks at all, anywhere in the world. There is no lighting standard for electric trucks anywhere in the world. We had, you know, I know there's a couple of TGE people in the room, but we found a 20-cent piece of asbestos on the site, literally 20-cent piece. We think that a bird had dropped it as it went over the site, literally, because we've got no idea how it went there. We had to excavate 5 cubic metres of soil around the 20-cent piece of asbestos. We had to stop works for 30 days to remove 5 cubic metres for a 20-cent piece of it. So there was all of these things that you look back now and go, oh, if I'd known that, you know, what I know now is immeasurable. And the onus is on us as a business to share this knowledge around the truck and the freight and the transport industry. It's really important that we all learn from this.
Yeah. Steve, let me turn to you about something. So I know you've got a very close connection to Porsche, right? Where's Richard? Porsche.
George was both of us.
Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with the EV charging commercial clients, and specifically the role that you played here, and I guess what exactly goes into installing large capacity chargers?
There's a lot of that. There's a lot to unpack in that question. Thanks, George. Well, basically, when we were working with Porsche, we worked with Porsche AG in Europe. And so a lot of the back-end deals with the charger was done in development with the Taycan that was coming. So in 2017, ABB, who I was working with at the time, released the Terra HP, which you'll see down there, and if we've got time later, I'm happy to run through that with anybody. That was the first 350 kilowatt charger in the world. And the reason why that needed to be made was because that car there can charge at 350 kilowatts. No one else could. At the time, we were charging at about 50 or 60 kilowatts. So that in itself provided some challenges, because the vehicles, we weren't sure how many vehicles were coming. We didn't know in the site how much power it is. That particular charger is 250 amps, or if we had 2 of them, nearly 600 amps. So that's a lot of extra capacity that we need on the site to do that. So there was a lot of discussions with Porsche Brighton with regard to solar and other alternatives. There was grid connection issues as well. A lot of people think when they're potentially putting in chargers for a commercial or retail operation like here, you can just plug it into the wall because it's an electrical device. Of course you can. You can't. It's a very different charger than something like that one there, which is, you know, a single phase charger or a 3-phase charger. A single phase that you take home with the car, you can plug into your home with a 32 amp breaker and off you go, you're laughing. But this one requires a lot more. Once you've got multiple chargers on the site, then you're also not only considering the loads and everything that you've got on the front end of the charger, but on the back end of the charger, you're looking at load management, because you don't want it to go over your set loads from your capacity. And so sometimes, and this is what you'll find when you're driving your vehicle, you'll go to a charger and it might say it's a 180 kilowatt charger and you're only pulling 60, 70 kilowatts. The reason for that is that it's been throttled back because there might be multiple vehicles on that charger, or there might be that time of year, that time of day where the site needs extra charging. So rather than cut you out altogether, the charger is throttled back. hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah.
And I've got to tell you this story, right? I know it's about Mythbusters, right? I've got to tell you this story. Hold that for a second. Okay, so you know who irons at home? It's not a trick question, right? It's not. Seriously, it's not. Okay, so you plug in your iron and you turn it on. You don't know where I'm going, do you?
I do.
You plug it in, you turn it on at the wall, right? Is that what you do? Okay. So for one of our trucks, that's true. You plug it in, you turn it on at the wall, you go away and it charges. But the other one, guess what? You turn it on, then you plug it in. I know. It's really, I mean, it's not stupid. It just happens to be the way that the OEM designed that vehicle. And so the first time we plugged in the truck, of course, all the guys went, okay, and off they went, didn't charge. Came back the next morning, rang the OEM, you have to turn it on, then plug it in. Okay, whatever. So then the next night they went to charge it. I'm sorry, Mark, this is dreadful. The next night they went to charge it and it comes up with this thing saying time to charge. And they went, well, 9 hours, because it's a slow charger, we need 9 hours of charge. Came back the next morning, hadn't charged. What's going on now? No, time to charge actually means what time do you want it to start charging? And it was after 9 o'clock at night, so they plugged it in and it didn't start charging until 9 o'clock the next morning. I'm just throwing that out there.
So actually, that probably leads into a couple of questions that I had later on, but I might as well mention them now. So, yeah, that's right. So Steve, or any of the panellists, is there such a thing as a universal plug? So, how does that work?
So what we're talking about here is the plug on the vehicle, right?
Yeah.
And the charger itself. Yeah. Okay. So in Australia, we only use certified charging standards, and we basically follow the IEC rules, which is the international rules. Most vehicles, 98% of the vehicles now are CCS. So there are two different groups that make the connectors. One is Charin in Europe, and the other one is Chidomo in Japan. There is a third one, which is GBT in China, which is not permitted to be used here in Australia. So what we talk about with the plug over in the Taycan over there, if you open it up, you'll see it's got two connectors. For those of you who've got EVs, excuse me if I'm going into basics here. Basically, that can do either an AC charge, which is a type 2 charge, which can be either 7.5 or 222 kilowatt charging, or it can do DC charging, which is the big charger down the back. So the standard for Australia for most vehicles is CCS. There's only probably 3 or 4 vehicles that use Chidomo, all Japanese makes. So it was basically, just to let you know, it was basically designed around the Japanese market because they wanted vehicle to grid, which is another discussion altogether, because of the weather events in Japan. So only vehicle to grid currently can be done on Japanese cars. They're working on it on CCS because it's not only a connection technology for providing the power, but also to communicate with the vehicle, which is the other myth, if I can just diverse just a little bit, is the interoperability between the charger and the car, right? So when you plug in a vehicle and you don't get the charger to give you any charge, it's because it's not communicating with the car. It's not the charger, it's the vehicle, right? So you need to actually make sure that the connection is correct, which is normally just lifting the cable up so that the two comms connections in there are getting a correct signal, because that's normally the first point, okay? There are some vehicles coming into the country though, from other countries, that do have interoperability problems, and this is where you need to have a charger or an OEM backing the charger, which can actually dial into the charger and actually work out what's going on.
Can I just ask a question there?
Sure, go for it.
I mean, in Australia, we are anal when it comes to importing cars. Okay? I can't believe that this is new technology and we have a unique opportunity where we have one system that is for plugging in and for one system that is receiving. I cannot believe that we're allowing cars to come in that don't meet one standard. What's wrong with us?
Yeah.
It's an even more basic question. Where does the car charge from? It's the back, right? Or the front. Where does the truck charge from? It's the front. We reverse all the truck. There's some really basic considerations that we are dare I say it, Chris, you know, we have to accept what the manufacturers give us.
Yeah, but would it not be fair to say, these are our guidelines, if you don't meet them, we're not bringing your vehicles in?
We wouldn't have any cars.
I can tell you, I can tell you for anyone that's new to EV in here, obviously the biggest selling EVs is Tesla, right? Tesla with the Model S and the Model X have their own Apple-type connector, if you like, right? But the 3 and the Y had to conform to IEC standards for here. So that's why you can now use, when you bring your Taycan, you can actually use it on a Tesla charger now. So that, I think, is coming. The Japanese are a little bit slower on the back end of that, I think, coming into Australia, and it's really only 2 manufacturers. So, sorry, George.
No, that's all right. No, that's okay. So, Alex, I just want to jump just to something else with you.
Sure.
So, recently when you were at Transurban, which wasn't all that long ago, you mentioned that you conducted a little experiment around range anxiety.
My favourite topic. Range
Yeah,
anxiety.
you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, look, it all started because people always tell me, oh, you know, I'm worried about, I'm going to run out of charge. It's like, yeah, okay. What I'm seeing is it's habitual. We're so accustomed to saying, like, I'm going to run my car till the end of the week and go and fill it up once a week, yet we're quite happy taking our phones and plugging them in whenever we've got the opportunity. So I thought, I'm going to stretch this. I'm going to take a car. I had a big weekend planned. I was going to go, these are all the destinations, and don't judge me for them. Went to the National Boys Choir in Ringwood from my home in Balwyn. Then I went off to the airport to pick up a friend. We went to Mount Dunedin State, past Geelong, went all the way to the RACV Club in Torquay, which did have a fast charger. I didn't need it, because the ambition was I was going to do 400 k's that weekend, either without charging or just plugging it into a 10 amp plug that you can see anywhere. Not even using one of those AC chargers. To just eliminate this myth of range anxiety. And one of the issues is typically people travel less than 50 kilometres per day. All right, so what's this whole concept of I've got to have 400 kilometres of range? You don't actually need it. Go home at night, plug it in, you'll have a full charge by the next day. Whether you're running it off 10 amps or if you've got an AC charger, you'll have a full vehicle by the next day. So what is this range anxiety? Anyway, I did the experiment, went for 3 days, I plugged it in overnight at my mate's place, came back, parked it at Transurban, and still had 50% charge on it after doing 400 k's. Right? So range anxiety, it's the anxiety it's a myth. It's created by, well, it's offset by behavioural change and recognising how you drive and the convenience. And that's the other thing, the convenience. Why do I have to go and divert myself to go and find a place to fill up when I just go home and park it? Well, it saves time, right? Now, yes, question, because you're going to ask me, what about if I'm going to Sydney? No.
The question is, if you look at, so yeah, easily for the people who have the house,
Yes.
what about the people in apartments where there is no proper parking and people park on the street?
But Dick, you pinched my
Did you read the
Jump his
script?
question, he's ready.
Thank you, that is a perfect question. It's a really good question. Sorry?
Wireless charging?
Induction loop charging, yes, it's possible. But no, if you're in an apartment, there's a couple of things happening at the moment. I'll start with that less than 50 kilometres of driven range typically. Jeez, it's going to be a long answer. Forgive me for this.
No.
Apartments have spare capacity. Steve touched on it when we looked at this building here. We have to incorporate a charger. But apartments typically have got a 1600 amp main switchboard. This is where the electrical engineer comes in, right? They have got spare capacity. Let me jump to another concept, because at any given moment in Australia, we've got 60 gigawatts of generation capacity at any given moment. As a country, we consume 260 terawatt hours of power, but 60 gigawatts can actually give us about 500 terawatt hours of power. So what happens during the course of a day is what they call a duck curve. There's a peak demand when we wake up, and when we get home, and just before we go to sleep. And those hours between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m, there's so much spare capacity in the grid. Think back to the 50 kilometres, right? So the building codes of Australia, if they haven't already ratified it, and they will only demand 17 kilowatt hours of charge per vehicle per night. That can be controlled using demand software, demand management software, in those hours between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Back to the apartment question. You live in an apartment, you've got to talk to the body corporate, you need an assessment done. It just is coincidental, maybe not. Our sponsor here, TBS, provides that service. They'll do an audit with the apartment building, okay? They will tell you what spare capacity is available. They will put in a reticulation network, put in the charges that you need for your vehicle, and it's not as expensive as people think. We can actually get it down to the same cost it would be if you were trying to install that charger in your own home. And we do say, and me and Steve like this topic, because people call that a charger. It's not actually a charger. It's not. All these take-hands in here have got an inverter built into them. Right? So they take AC current at 11 kilowatts and invert it so you can charge a vehicle. That charger doesn't actually have a charger in it. The charger's in the vehicle. The only time you bypass that is when you're using one of our big daddies over there to bypass the AC charge, straight DC charge into the battery, which is why you get the faster rate of charge. That was a very long-winded answer. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did, but the question again
Yep.
is,
Oh no.
new age apartments,
Yep.
they could be built with all the facilities.
Yes.
Right. But old age apartments, there's hardly any space for new age cars to fit into and get into the car park. And,
Okay. Yep.
and people living in inner suburbs in those apartments,
Mm-hmm.
there are multiple cars
Yes.
which will be parked outside on the streets.
If they're parked on the street, yeah, that's it.
And then that's where
That's a
if we
challenge.
If we are to go by 2030 all electric vehicles,
Yep.
we need an infrastructure to power all those vehicles.
True.
And again, so that's
Do
where-
we have enough grid capacity?
do we have enough infrastructure?
Do we have enough infrastructure? Infrastructure?
to use that?
No, not yet. Grid capacity we do. So I don't know if anyone heard the question. But
And there'll be decent extension cable.
extension cable might work.
I've seen a few.
There's,
The big question though, with
Sorry.
the apartments and developments, if you go to buy an apartment today in a new development,
yes.
the big question is the insurance. And what I'll say to you is,
Mhm.
we will not insure this building with an EV vehicle being charged.
Is this what they're saying?
So this is, I'm saying to you, this
It's
is.
being debated.
That's intriguing. That's being debated, yeah.
This is what's happening at the moment.
Yep.
And, I mean, I've got friends who are looking to buy an apartment, downsizing and all of that, with an EV vehicle, who are now looking to buy a non-EV vehicle so that they can park the car in the apartment.
Well, this one, I must admit, I'm stumped on that one. Anyone got an answer on insurance? That's beyond me.
Yeah, so I'm working with a group called EV FireSafe, which is Emma Sutcliffe. If you've never linked in with her, do so. She's the knowledge on that. And if you're looking to develop an apartment or having trouble with insurance, reach out to them. So it's a bit of a misnomer at the moment, and the Insurance Council is debating it with the groups. The short answer is the fire risk on an EV is less than it is on an induction vehicle. So it's more about the discussions that people have seen overseas, and there's been a lot of misinformation coming out on it. And so, yeah, there needs to be some intelligence, and there is some really interesting stuff. EV FireSafe, if anybody wants to look at that, if you're a developer in the room, have a look at it and reach out to Emma.
Sorry,
because
Steve,
she's
what
the
I'll
lead.
say is if you've got that type of question, catch up with Steve later and he'll give you the details. That'd be right, won't it? Yeah. Geb, go ahead.
I would have just said twaddle.
I don't know if this is your field of expertise, but we spoke about vehicles, we spoke about trucks. What about the agricultural sector? How are they developing in regards to this field?
Sorry,
Agricultural sector.
we did the electric,
Yeah.
we did the electric mining truck one.
Oh, yeah.
So I do know John Deere is probably leading the way when it comes, big green equipment rather than big yellow equipment. Komatsu is doing a huge amount of work. Sandvik, a number of the mining, the yellow entities also do the green entities as well. And because they are not going long distances necessarily, they're doing hard work, but they're not going long distances, you can actually afford to have the battery weight over steer axles and that sort of thing. So it's actually going to be instrumental, I would say, for agriculture.
Yeah, further to what Heather was saying, absolutely. The EV industry is going well in advance of just the cars. You know, you've heard from Heather about the trucks. We're very much involved with the buses. So every state in the country now has got electric buses running. You'll see them running around here with Kinetic or CDC on them. And this also moves into every other vehicle, whether it be a logistics vehicle, autonomous vehicle, which my friend here is involved in. Agriculture is definitely a market that is going in that direction, where you've got harvesters, those sorts of things in Europe are already happening and getting and used electric. So it is coming down there. It hasn't been pushed through into Australia yet. I mean, really the EV industry here, if you'd asked me when I started doing this probably around 2015, we were 10 to 15 years behind. We're probably about 5 years behind now. I think you'd agree. We're starting to catch up, and even per capita, as I heard Ross Durango talk about it, All Energy, we are almost leading the way because of our catch up and obviously our population growth. So yeah.
So Heather, just on that range anxiety and also the discussion just now, what have you found with trucks? Because obviously I assume they're a slightly different scenario there.
I would say range anxiety for truck drivers is a very different thing. I am the worst offender, and you know I'm a bad ESG offender because I love my V8s. I will skid into a petrol station to fill up on, a couple of drops. I'm the worst offender of range anxiety. I got range anxiety this morning because I parked in the city using an app and it was telling me how many seconds were going down. I was getting really anxious. The drivers, when we first started this project, we had to go through all of these TWU negotiations on site. It was fascinating. We had to have 2 weeks of town hall sessions every hour on the hour when any of the drivers could come in and talk to me about what was going to happen. And you can imagine them coming in and talking to me and going, okay, blonde-haired chick, what does she know about trucks? So you've really got to answer their questions genuinely and prove that you know what you're talking about. But they would come in and they say, oh, I drive sorry, this is a gross generalisation. Gross generalisation, okay, please. They would come in and they would say, oh, I drive 400 kilometres a day, and I drive 40 tonne. And we go, hey, actually, so you do 110 kilometres a day and you take about 2.5 tonne. And so we had to have some really frank conversations to get them to cross this burden of range anxiety, because range anxiety is very real. It is a very real thing, when your heart's going like this. But I can tell you, we had a driver come into site last week, so we've got a whole lot of, we've got nearly 25. One of the drivers came back in last week and he had more energy in the battery than when he left in the morning, because we've gone through this whole process of training the drivers in how to drive an electric vehicle, because you do drive an EV in a different way. Particularly for a truck, you need to take advantage of regenerative braking. You need to take advantage of not having your air conditioning going through, full throttle or whatever it is. So the fact that he'd gone out with a full load, came back with an empty load, he was really precise about the route that he'd taken. He came back with more energy than when he left. And that has been just a phenomenal turning point, because I actually had our head of fleet come past my desk the other day, on Monday, Tuesday, and he said, those EVs are going great. The drivers love them. And this is a guy who used to run when he saw me coming down the corridor a couple of years ago. I said, yeah, I told you it would work. So I think for less so for cars, but I think for trucks, it's a very real sensation until you get the hang of how do I drive this thing and optimise that battery?
Just a quick one about the electric trucks, and you know that company that exists in South Dandenong, and had running one of their trucks, and they are absolute tyre shredders. Absolute tyre shredders. The acceleration coming out of an electric truck is amazing.
Sorry, Alex is saying they're fast.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
They're
Very
fast.
quick. They're very quick, but yes, that's my experience with the trucks.
Hey Alex, just back on the batteries.
Yep.
There's some noise around, I guess, that they're not good for the environment.
Yeah.
Right? And they don't last long. I think you've answered that don't last long bit.
Have I?
Well,
No, we haven't
you can
touched
go
on it
again,
yet.
You can go again. But basically, I guess the question is, are they bad for the environment? And do they last?
Do they last? I'll tackle first because that's easy with statistics. And there's a company in the States, I won't mention who they are, but they run a selection of hire cars for over 10 years now. And they've got statistical data showing these batteries lasting between 250,000 and 400,000 Ks, and they still retain about 90% of their charge. Now, the batteries that we put into take hands and so forth, they're a very robust battery. They are designed to put up with extremities in heat and so forth. They've got management systems in the vehicles to keep extending the life of them. So that sort of result is quite common. Right? You're always going to have the outliers. Someone's go, oh, I had a battery fail and I had to replace it and it cost me 10 grand. And yeah, that's true too. But it's an outlier. Statistically, these batteries will outlive the car. When it comes to total life cycle, they can also be repurposed. Now, as we transition to a greener grid, what we need with renewables is firming, what they call firming. It means that during the day, you get lots of solar capacity, you have to retain it. You have to store it in a battery. Wind's the same, the wind doesn't always blow. You need batteries to store this. So apart from commercially available battery storage systems, one of the things I've seen is that they repurpose the batteries they get out of the vehicles and put them into battery storage systems, because as a static battery, it doesn't have to have 90+% of its capacity. It just sits there in the middle of nowhere and it can deteriorate slowly. 80, 70%, you'll still get that retention. So it's one of the life cycle processes to, hope that answers the question, George. Or there's more questions, yes?
Two things with the batteries. I mean, we all know people that kill their phone battery because they mistreat it,
Yes.
don't charge it correctly,
Yes.
all of that. Secondly, there's 2 billion cars in the world.
Yes.
Production capacity is 80 million a year.
Yes.
So even if you trashed every old car when you bought in a new one,
Yes.
it would still take 25 years to replace those cars.
Yes.
So we're not going to wake up one day and have a heap of electric vehicles out in the street wanting to charge. It's going to be a gradual thing.
I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Also, I used to work for a developer, and councils, this 20 years ago,
Yes.
were pushing back on parking spaces. Inner city dwellings are going to be lucky to have a car space
Yes.
within another 10 years.
Yes, I totally agree with you. The transition, those numbers that you quoted, is spot on. Absolutely spot on. I mean, we're thinking that even in Australia, we've only got 20 million vehicles, right? By 2030, it's going to be 2 million electric vehicles out of a total fleet. So it's a gradual improvement. And going back to the statistics we discussed earlier about grid capacity, assuming that you manage that demand when there's spare capacity available, by 2030, you only need an extra 5% capacity in the grid. What is challenging though, because we're transitioning away from gas, so gas appliances being replaced, it's going to have more of a burden on the grid than electric vehicles. Because with electric vehicles at least, we can manage that load. And I think you touched on it, I know you've got a question coming up as well. Batteries, battery life. So with the autonomous vehicles that I'm implementing at the moment, they go on charge every hour, on the hour, and they get a 6 or 7 minute fast charge. And we do it between 70% and 90% to try and extend the life of the battery. But that's a measured, it's optimising the battery life. With vehicles, I mean, there's some things that we try and educate people, which is don't run it to empty.
I always call the ABC. We talked about that.
Yeah, actually, no, you go, ABC. But there's another question over here.
Just,
Think ABC.
just a quick question. We know that batteries have rare earths that
Yes.
they need. And that's a topical issue with,
Yes, it is.
like, I just thought I'd bring it up, as everyone knows, in Africa and all that. But
Yes.
how do we see the future of batteries being constructed? Are they going to rely on these cobalts and lithiums?
Did you want to take that one?
Go for it.
No, you can do it, because Steve hasn't much to say. So. He's got two topics, LDS and ABC.
Yeah, so the new batteries that are coming out now, I think they're called LDV, is that the one? LDV, yeah. Which is, I don't know what the breakdown of that is. Do you know what that is? Lithium, cobalt, something or other. Anyway, they are a longer life battery and will give you a longer range. So the vehicles like you're seeing in here and some of the ones that are out there as well, even my own vehicle, they suggest not to charge to 100% unless you're immediately going to use it. In other words, charge it to 100% overnight and then drive, right? This new style of battery, you can just keep charging up to 100 and it's lighter, which the biggest killer of EVs is weight, obviously. So yeah, but where I was going to go with this is we always talk about the ABC of charging, will always be charging. The biggest killer of batteries is discharge or overcharge. Right, so I make a habit of my own vehicle of not running down much past 20% and not going much over 80%. The other thing is the etiquette, and because we're talking about myths with regarding charging, if you're doing a public charge and you are doing a trip, consider planning your trip. And I use the example of Melbourne to Adelaide. In a normal vehicle, it's just over 800 Ks. You probably get there in one tank if you fill and you drive it pretty well. With an EV, don't expect to go full to empty and then wait and then get one, you may not get to a charge, or when you get to the charge, someone else is on it, or three, the charge is not bloody working, right? So you always have something in your back pocket and stop a number of times. And I use the analogy where if I stopped once on the way to Adelaide, I'd get there an hour later than if I stopped 3 times, because I'm continually topping it up. The duck curve that Al was talking about before, the most efficient is around 80%. That last 20% takes you as long as it getting 0 to 80%. So don't sit on the charger and wait and hold everyone else up. You make sure that you're doing that. So when we're talking about range anxiety, and I'll circle back to that, I like to talk about charger anxiety because I can pretty much plan my trip. But if I get to a charger and it's not working, or a charger is over, got one person on it, another person waiting, and another person waiting, that's adding to my journey. So always, put in something in plan.
So Steve and Heather, is there a lack of charging stations? Not only just to suit cars, but also trucks, like a long haul and so forth?
Just this week, it started last week, Volvo drove an FH, so a 650, 700 horsepower Globetrotter, with on the back of it an emergency FE, electric FE, from Brisbane to Canberra using public infrastructure. Like, it was fine. It was absolutely fine. So it's there, but we've got a long way to go. For our trucks, I wouldn't want to be having charger anxiety. I wouldn't want one of our drivers to pull up and have that anxiety. So we're seeing a change around public infrastructure, absolutely. But at the moment, the trucks need to go back to base. They're just not quite there yet. I'd also say that for the trucks, we can't go under 20%. So there's actually a limit for our trucks at 20%. That they physically can't go down. Another thing was, when it comes to our batteries, every single part of that battery into my Volvo or to my Fuso is recyclable, every single part of it. So I would anticipate we're going to have a really fundamental shift in recycling. And hey, I'm so proud of my husband today. Can I just say, he rang me and he said, I've learned what recycling is. And I was like, oh, thanks, sweetheart. What have you done? And he said, I took the carby from the Corvette and I got it recycled. I think that, we're going to see this substantial shift in what can be recycled, which is pretty exciting.
I just want to add to that, I guess, public charging. So I got some figures today that I downloaded because it's changing daily. I looked at it just on 2 months ago, now it's still working. There was around 600 chargers. There's now 1,000 public fast chargers around the country. in over 600 locations, 13 networks represented. So there's a lot there. It's pretty much going in 2 per day, which is what Ross Durango was talking about the other week. And that equates to 1 public charger per 135 cars. So there's a few stats there for you to absorb. But the public charging industry, with companies like ChargeFox, with EV, with Ampol, with Shell, they're all starting to get there now. BP as well. You've got a BP Pulse just around the corner from here. You're starting to see a lot of these chargers going in everywhere, and not just at a service station. Particularly the service stations are actually getting reduced. These are ones that are in the suburbs, for instance, are on public land and valuable land. So it's going into where you get your haircut, where you go to the service station, that sort of thing, shopping, that sort of thing. So I'll ask that.
So we'll get to questions in a second. We need to finish here to get to questions. Just hang on a sec.
Can you define for us what is a fast charger and what is a supercharger, which is what Tesla claims to have in the States?
They throw around the word supercharger and everything else.
And a lot of foreign brands are now signing on to the Tesla supercharger.
All right, I'm going to give you a definition of chargers, right? So the one next to you, which is an AC charger, I call it a destination charger. So it's a charger that you have at the destination you're going to be at, okay? Slow, yeah. It's trickle charge, and even the one that you plug into your home in just a single phase plug. The next size, which is around 24 to 50 kilowatts, is called a rapid charger. That'll put about 3 kilometres of range every minute of charge, right? So in around 15 minutes, you'll get around 37 kilometres, which is what the TAC will tell you is the average for a person. A fast charger is anywhere between 50 to 180 kilowatts, and then beyond 180 kilowatts is a supercharger. So a supercharger in Tesla world is 240 kilowatts. In everyone else, it's 350 kilowatts. So, yeah. And just to let you know, the plug is limited to 500 amps. So that means the maximum that we can do on a public charger currently on that plug is 400 kilowatts.
So just, if we can just stop there, not for questions in a minute, but what I'd like to do is call Chris Todd and Richard up. And I know we've had questions, but there's probably more coming. So please come forward, and as I said, ask whatever you want to ask.
I have a question. So Chris, when he introduced today, was talking about supply chains. Yeah, and maybe I've just been hanging around Rob a bit too long, but I've been learning lots of, again, a lot of the data around the climate, the environment, and so forth, and again, the supply chains are really important, right? From what you've each been through, and they're different experiences, but they're quite out there, in terms of the bigger picture, the bigger supply chain, the target, where we're trying to get to, what's missing? What have you got confidence in? What bits would you ask to be different? What do we need to point our attention to? And beyond the disinformation, I mean, we're here because of myths, so let's leave the dis and misinformation, which is, that's a different conversation altogether, but I'd be really keen for your views.
If I can give you a bit of an intermodal answer, because TGE is rail, ship, aviation, trucks, forklifts, courier vans, Westmark. We cover the full gamut. When it comes to electric vehicles, I can get an EV truck faster than I can get a diesel truck at the moment. And the reason for that is that the market has shifted so substantially over the last few years that diesel trucks, we're going, I'll put in an order today, it might be 6, 12, 18, 24 months in advance. Like, it's a long, long way out to get anything that is a fossil fuel derivative. I can actually get EVs faster than that. I can get EV trucks faster than that. The flip side of that is that the issues we're having with climate change, whether you believe in climate change, frankly, I don't really care. It's not relevant. Sorry, it is relevant, but but the issues we're having with the flow-on effects of climate change, particularly around resilience of supply chain, is having a monstrous impact, and whether that's the rail network going down because of flooding or the fires or all of these sorts of things, I think the resilience of the supply chain is going to be really challenging.
Wow. I'm more like you rather than these wonderful experts here tonight. What I can tell you is this, that all of these questions that have been posed and all of this discussion, Mark Rogers and myself and our team here, we are posed with these every day, and frankly, in many ways, we don't know much more than you. But I'll tell you what we do know. This is what we do know. I've got a 2-year-old grandson. If I brought him into this room this evening, he would think you're all crazy because he doesn't know anything. So where we're talking, and I love this term about range anxiety and this thing and that thing, all you're worried about is what you don't know. And the other thing that you're worried about is change.
Yep.
That's all you're worried about. The fact is, this is where we're going. This is what we're being directed to do. And as Heather so wonderfully put it, I don't care whether it's about environment or anything. This is the way we're going. The most important thing from a Porsche point of view, and I'm sorry, I'm going to put the Porsche hat on, is that we're going to do it really, really, really well. And we're going to have the best technology and be the best at it. That's what we're trying to be. So all I can say to you is, don't worry about it. Just don't worry. There's nothing to worry about. I did like, Steve did a wonderful example about driving from here to Adelaide. Probably the one thing that you're going to have to accept, you just get in your car tonight, you turn it on, and you drive it. And then all of a sudden there's a little gauge. Let me talk, actually, if I can just labour for a moment about a gauge. When I first had a car, we had a fuel gauge which had F and E and then half. And I'd had 10 gallons. When it was halfway, I had 5 gallons. But on your gauge, that isn't where it is. It's how much you have consumed and how far you consumed with whatever fuel you have left. And it's exactly the same with electricity. So it might say it's got 78% and it gives you an estimation that it's going to do 312 kilometres. If you put your foot down, that's going to very quickly drive down. It's exactly the same way. So all I'm saying is that we just have to plan things. And the thing about electricity is that if you're going to drive to Adelaide, you have to think about it. That's what it's all about. The fact is that we in Australia do, on average, about 12,000 kilometres per year. Quick, can someone do the maths and tell me how many that is per day?
It's under 50.
Thank you.
Under 50.
So, Chris, you picked it up beautifully. I think that's another important thing. Change your mindset. Don't think about it. Just do it. And that's as far as I can go with it. In terms of the technical stuff and all of these wonderful facts that we've heard, I've learnt an amazing amount tonight. It's been fabulous for me and for Mark Rogers, my colleague here, who's an absolute expert with Taycan. So all I can say to you is, whether it's Taycan or Tesla or Kia or BYD, whatever that means, doesn't build your dreams. Well, I tell you, if you want to build your dreams, come here.
Well done.
I've got a microphone.
You just mentioned before about sorry, Rob Nethercutt. I'm going to take a slight change of tack from my motorsport background. On the motorsport on the motorsport track, cars run at 95, under 95 decibel. The Grand Prix is different. They have a provision that allows them to go above that. Your car, normally on the road, has to run at under 75 decibel. What is the benefit? Have we measured the benefit of the noise pollution reduction at this point of having, whatever it is, 5% of our vehicles running as electric? That's my question. But the second thing is, I'd like one of you to do an impression of an 18-geared truck taking off from the lights, an electric one.
Don't test me, I'll do that.
Please do.
You know what's amazing about the trucks and the cars is they're so quiet. They're so quiet that we have to put things in them so that as they go past, you can tell there's something going past. So all of the trucks and cars have this weird sort of noise about them. So yeah, like playing cards, right? Yeah. Well, but that's pretty much what it is. No. That's pretty much what they're doing. So they have for the trucks, they have this really high pitch noise that you can't hear, but you can recognise that there's something coming towards you, and you'll turn and go, what's that? And you'll see a truck coming barreling towards you, but one of the benefits about the lack of noise emissions is, if you think about, certainly from my trucks, we can do deliveries across the night because we're not going to hear about them during the night. So we're going to change all of that pressure on our traffic systems if we can deliver them during the night. The only hold up is the policy to make sure that we can do that. We've got to overcome this policy anxiety about allowing our trucks into our metro areas so that we can do it overnight.
Just if anyone's taken a bus out of Lonsdale Street, you're sitting there waiting, or Pitt Street or George Street in Sydney, the noise coming out of it, it's horrendous. And that is a significant change. Like the electric buses, it's beautiful.
Our State of Environment report, Victoria's State of Environment report by Jill Sparks, the State Environment Commissioner, has twice recommended that all roads in Victoria be monitored for noise and air quality, and it's not been taken up. I don't think it's even being acknowledged by the government or in any other state. However, in the EU, all cities in the EU now monitor for noise because of the impact on mental health. So it's a major issue. I doubt that your question can be answered, but it's a real opportunity.
Great. Great.
Down in decibel count by 90%, is it, for a truck?
At least.
I do have to say though, if I go to an electric Harley, I want the noise, because that's why you ride a Harley, right? So you can be noisy and obnoxious. That's why we do it.
Hi. I might. In terms of like EV market penetration, my question is around policy making from the both federal and state government point of view. I think Heather just mentioned policy maker today, and I think we touch on a lot in terms of penetration tonight. Heather mentioned on the OEM part. Steve, you mentioned on the standards, and Alex, you mentioned the imbalance, the demand and supply. But at a federal level, what would you like to say the federal government would do differently today and future? And state level as well, we mentioned apartment issues. Like in Sydney nowadays, some real estate agents are advertising, like charging as a part of apartment purchase or like rental. It's happening right now, but you don't see that in Melbourne. So what state government here can do differently?
That is a really loaded question. I mean, our Porsche friends here would be totally frustrated by what happens in Victoria then compared to other states. I know I was when I bought a vehicle. It definitely needs some leadership from the federal government, and it's not only with regard to the vehicles, but for the infrastructure that we need. We've been talking about the number of vehicles, but we need over 1,000 chargers in the next 5 years to make this viable, public chargers. And everyone's sitting on their hands. I've been working in this with regard to the chargers, for instance, for 6 years, and it took me 4 years before we got our really first large orders starting to come through. It's what I call a slow burner as a salesperson, a slow burner. But now it's starting to, move. Incentive is what makes people move, make these companies move and these industries move to take on infrastructure, which then has a flow-down effect to the vehicles, because that is, I think, something that is holding us back.
I can add to that. So the fringe benefits tax that the government introduced had a significant impact. If you think the statistics were if you buy a $60,000 EV, the payment per month is the equivalent of about a $45,000 petrol vehicle. Right, so all the incentives, whether it's FBT concessions or in other states you've got registration concessions, all of those add up, right? But don't forget, typically, and if you're doing say 12,500 k's per year, an electric vehicle charged at home at 23 cents per kilowatt hour is probably less than $1,000 compared to a petrol or diesel car of equivalent size doing it 5 or 6 grand, right? So there's 4 or 5 grand in your pocket every year with an electric vehicle. So factor that in. But back to what I said earlier, the fuel efficiency standards, to answer your question, which is what the Electric Vehicle Council is pushing heavily with the government. If they adopt that, like they've adopted that overseas, they'll have a significant impact because it'll stop it'll stop the gas guzzlers from being available in preference to the electric vehicles. That's the biggest one that I can see anyway. Another question.
Hi. 2 questions, more simplistic and not as global. I want to buy an electric vehicle. 2 things come to mind, conversations that have been had with me. Conversations that have been had with me. Firstly, Sam,
I've got a card.
Sam, maybe you should have a hybrid. So is that a stepping stone phase because the change is too hard, or like where are you sitting on that and what do you think about that? And secondly, Sam, have you thought about where hydrogen cars are heading? No, because I'm not really into cars, I'm a nurse. So what does that mean and how does that fit into the whole picture and scenario and the conversation?
Richard? I've got my own opinion, I'll share with you later.
I'll get your number later for it. But seriously, it's a wonderful question. If you think about it, it really is. Where do I start? Really, in many, many ways, in terms of it, it's no different to buying any sort of motor vehicle. It's not just the fact that it's driven by electricity. You've got to look at what it's going to do. That's number one. But your second part of your question was really good, and that's about hybrid. There's 2 types of hybrid. The Toyota, for want of a better word, is literally, it turns the engine off and allows you to idle, and it'll sit there in neutral and it won't consume fuel. I do a lot of cabs and I ask every one of the drivers how they're going with economy. And most of those hybrids are averaging around 4 to 4.5 litres per 100 kilometres, which is pretty damn good on 91. Plug-in hybrid is a totally different situation. It has an electric engine, the same as the electric car does, and has a battery which you charge, and it can charge 2 ways. It can charge by plugging in, as we've discussed the home charger there. Doesn't matter whether it's slow or fast or whatever, it charges. And with our new hybrids in the KN range, which is our big SUV, they'll do around about 90 kilometres on electric only. Now, the convenience factor of it is that you can get in the car and you can decide you're going to your beach house or you're going to the country or whatever, or Adelaide. And your suburban driving is going to be obviously on electric, so you're not using any fuel. When you get out on the open road and you are travelling for the most possible distance for the least amount of fuel consumed, is the time when you will be using the petrol engine. It will also regenerate through regeneration, like all of those do, but it will also recharge the battery. So when you get to the next suburban town and you're cruising through at 50 or 60 k's an hour, you're using the least amount of fuel. Overall, our hybrids will consume fuel at around about an average of 3.2 litres per 100 kilometres. Now, I know people it's a sport, and they'll try really hard to consume the least amount of fuel. For most of us, we just want to get in the car and go. We couldn't care less. We just look at the thing and you don't even know how many litres per 100 kilometres you do, and you don't really care. But for some people, it's really important, particularly in the trucking industry or just because that's what you want to do. The facts that you gave about the amount that you're going to be spending on fuel compared to an electric charge vehicle, that's a classic example of good home economics. Does that answer your question?
I'd like to add to that, Richard. One more question, because we do have to wrap it up.
Hydrogen I could talk about. But I was going to endorse what Richard said. So my advice would have been, first of all, what's your lifestyle, what's your budget? But the beauty of that type of hybrid vehicle, as opposed to a Toyota hybrid vehicle, is that it's got a much smaller battery. So think about the carbon content of the battery, much smaller. But typically, and I know this because Roscoe tells you this, in a plug-in hybrid, he's never filled up his tank in a year because he just...
Alex, do you want... Sorry,
driving.
People may not know. When you're talking about Ross, who you're
Oh,
talking
he's... what's his position at the EV Council?
Policy manager.
Policy manager. So he lives it, but he hasn't gone fully electric for that reason. So it actually suits his lifestyle. And I absolutely endorse, if you do want to go the long trip, you've got the best of both worlds. At the moment, it's probably a good transitional piece. Although, buy a Taycan, it's beautiful.
All right, so just on that...
Talk about hydrogen fuel cells?
Yeah, hang on, Alex, we're going to have to stop, sorry. If there are more questions, as I said earlier, or at the beginning, please engage with these guys and they'll answer your questions, but we do need to wrap it up. So I do want to say thank you to the three of you for taking the time and providing such an informative discussion. It's a pity I couldn't really get to have more fun with you, but anyway. Chris, Richard, thank you for coming in and offering sponsorship, and for Richard, for you and Natalie to open up Porsche and allow us to do this. Very, very grateful. Thank you so much, and for your insights in particular. So with that, it's a wrap. I'll hand over to Stephen, but as I said earlier, please engage, ask questions, and I'm sure you'll get the answers that you're looking for.
Thank you again for joining. Look, Richard, thank you. And Natalie, who's at the back, we've got a little plaque. So thank you again. It wouldn't have happened. Everyone give Natalie a round of applause. Thank you again. We really appreciate it. Wonderful showroom and via Porsche. Again, thank you to our sponsors. Chris Todd, who's standing there again. Wouldn't have happened again without you as well. So thank you. Much obliged.
Thanks, man.
And last but not least, we all had a good feed and had some wine from Sluministi. So yeah, thank you again from Peter at Sluministi. Appreciate it. Yes, that's for you. Sorry, thank you. And last but not least, we've got some amazing socks for you. 2000% Australian, non-electric, not by. They will match it. They will match it. So.
The emblem on it?
Absolutely. So wear them with pride when you're speeding or you're driving a new EV vehicle. Yes, yes. They will be once I think you drive it. Now, if you thought tonight was amazing, well, we've got an action-packed next week. We've got the great Sally Cap joining us to talk about the address of of Victoria and Melbourne. So please, if you can attend, it will be a sold-out event. So please get in early. Good evening.